Anime is an incredibly expansive medium. It encompasses so many genres and series and identities within it. But looking at the visual style of anime, you can clearly pinpoint a couple key eras of style, along with the individual characteristics that go along with them. You have the really old original era of TV anime, such as Astro Boy and Speed Racer. Then there's the classic retro anime aesthetic, with shows like Dragon Ball and the Gundam series. Following this, there was a brief stint into hyper-violent or grungy shows, which peppered the late 1990s and early 2000s. After that, we got back on a steady track to the style of shows we know and tolerate today. Now, that wasn't necessarily the best or most thorough explanation of the evolution of anime art styles, but it's okay because that's not what this video is about. I want to talk about a brief detour we made in the year 2010 with a little show called the Tatami Galaxy. So, the Tatami Galaxy is an adaptation of the homonymous book written by Tomohiko Morimi. It was actually produced by some pretty big names in the anime industry. The show was directed by Masaki Yuasa, a man who later went on to direct critically acclaimed shows such as Devilman Crybaby and Ping Pong the Animation. And the actual animation of the show was done by Studio Madhouse, who have done an incredible number of anime over the years, among which are Frieren and One Punch Man as some of their most recent work. The opening for the show was also done by Asian Kung Fu Generations, a J-rock band who have contributed a lot to the anime scene over the years, probably most known for their song Riri as the opening to Erased. It has an incredible tone, story, and is executed pretty much flawlessly the whole way down. But one aspect of the show that has gone criminally undermentioned is the style in which it is animated. In particular, I want to talk about three things. The first is the way in which the characters are designed and how the series toes the line between caricatured silhouettes and realistic depictions of anatomy. Secondly, I want to touch on how the show leans into metaphorical imagery and boldly blurs the line between reality and symbolism. Finally, I would like to praise the way this show integrates live-action footage into its shots to contrast with the more metaphorical scenes it chooses to use, helping tell its story through a fascinating visual dichotomy. So to start out, let's talk character design. The standard anime look has become very well codified in the past decade or so. You can look at pretty much every modern anime and see some very obvious similarities. Characters are all proportioned in a very similar way. There isn't too much variation in terms of body types or face shapes. The most consistent points of variation between characters are the hair, eyes, or clothes, which is why you see such crazy iterations of these things. Hair in any shade from highlighter yellow to deep forest green, and eyes that have stars or hearts in them. These features have become the way a lot of people identify between different characters in the dark forest of modern anime design. And I'm kinda sick of it. Obviously, every series has its own art style and visual identity, different color palettes, backgrounds, moods, and tones. But no matter how distinct these things are, it's so rare to find a series that takes some chances on how it designs its characters. Jawlines are one of the biggest differences between how people's faces look in real life. Some people have very sharp and pronounced chins, and other people have more rounded and softer borders to their face. But in the modern anime style, everyone has the same semi-sharp chin and upside-down teardrop-shaped face. Anyone with a different face shape than this is usually only done for a joke. Side characters with big square jaws or wider faces who are almost always treated as himbos or comic relief. The Tatami Galaxy is a breath of fresh air with its more cartoony yet sensible character design. The cast of the anime is actually fairly small, but one thing you'll notice almost immediately is that everyone has very normal shades of hair. Pretty much everyone ranges somewhere from dark brown to black, with some very special exceptions having lighter brown or brunette looks. Now, obviously, anime is not trying to look realistic, and I don't necessarily have a problem with the crazy hair colors of some notable series. But it's really nice to have a break from that for once. Similarly, the other stereotypical marker of modern anime, the over-the-top eye colors and designs, is also gone. Everyone has pretty much the same standard eye shape with some small differences. What this choice does is make it so that the anime has to use different aspects of design in order to differentiate between the characters. And the Tatami Galaxy does this in a number of ways. The biggest one, as I mentioned briefly before, are the differences in body shapes and jawlines. From Watashi to Jogasaki to more outlandish ones like Higuchi, pretty much everyone has a unique face shape that lends to their personality perfectly. Higuchi in particular is a great example of what I want to talk about more later on, where his design is so outlandish and non-conforming to what normal body proportions are that it leans more into visual symbolism than a realistic depiction. Higuchi is depicted as a very wise and worldly person who's always very sure of themselves even when they maybe shouldn't be. And you get that in his design. His simple eyes yet upturned nose ascribing kindness along with a certain degree of pride. And they do the same thing with characters' hair, choosing silhouettes that fit the qualities of each individual person. Jogasaki's clean, well-kempt look is a testament to his mensch persona, while Ozu's hair is almost as greasy as he is. It's really impressive to me how this show chooses these hairstyles without making them crazy or unrealistic in a way that other shows tend to. And that's something I think a lot of shows can learn from. Whenever the Tatami Galaxy chooses to suspend its attempt at realism, it's for the purpose of telling a story or adding character. There's no spectacle for no reason. You don't get bombarded with bright lights and colors for the sake of noise. It's all calculated and for the purpose of telling a story. And that's the case with the show's treatment of body shape and silhouette. Just like with Higuchi, as I mentioned before, the Tatami Galaxy isn't afraid of breaking anatomy for the sake of style and to add to the story. The characters often take on an almost rubber hose style of motion to add to certain scenes. One of the easiest examples to point to is the motion of drinking, which is always over-exaggerated in a really fun way. It feels like whenever the modern anime style chooses to be conservative, the Tatami Galaxy does the opposite, and vice versa, choosing to remain very sensible and clean in their character designs while embracing a more cartoony style of motion is one of my favorite examples of this. Just to wrap up my earlier point about metaphorical takes on character design, let's take a look at one very important character, Ozu. If you've watched the Tatami Galaxy, you probably heard everything I said before about realistic face shapes and proportions and thought, well, what about Ozu? His large toothy grin and big oval eyes are nothing even close to realistic, and they definitely don't conform with other characters in the show. Well, don't worry, because there's a reason for that. Ozu is consistently characterized by the main character as a yokai, a Japanese folklore spirit. And after getting to know Ozu as a character, this description is really nothing surprising. Ozu loves playing tricks on people, his allegiances shift as often as the tides, and his crafty intelligence is enough to get him out of almost any pickle he finds himself in. He really does feel like the embodiment of a demon or malicious spirit, which is why the main character often curses Ozu for causing so much chaos in his life. However, at the very end of the show, when the main character comes to realize Ozu's true depth and occasionally pure intentions, Ozu's face changes back to one that conforms with the rest of the show's style. And the main character who teases Ozu in revenge takes on that familiar toothy grin. This shows that the choice to give Ozu such exaggerated monster-like features was a symbolic one. In reality, Ozu looks the same as everyone else in that world, but to the main character who blames Ozu for everything going wrong in his life, Ozu takes on a demon-like appearance. And when the torch is finally passed on and Watashi realizes how much Ozu actually means to him, Watashi takes on that same menacing symbolic face, the one that proudly declares that he and Ozu are linked together forever. This imagery is not commented on by anyone in the world, nor is it ever formally explained to the viewer why things appear this way. But by reading a bit between the lines, you can glean a lot of depth from these metaphorical stylistic choices. The use of the demonic face as a symbol between these two characters adds to the already moving character arc that Watashi goes on throughout the show, and it's a creative choice I'm glad the director chose to make. As you can see, the Tatami Galaxy isn't afraid to push boundaries with its character design, especially when the goal is to add to the story and further develop on existing themes and symbolism. And this sensibility also extends into the direction and shot choice during the entire show. Most anime find it hard to fully lean into symbolic imagery. It's understandable that in a medium as open-ended as animation, creatives would skew towards creating a concrete and tangible world. Metaphors and symbolism are great, but can come at the risk of blurring the line between what's real and what's symbolic. With Ozu, as I described above, choosing to give him a face that's purely figurative does add to the story, but it could also confuse people on what's really happening. But despite those risks, the Tatami Galaxy charges right ahead in creating some truly imaginative symbolic imagery. One of my favorite examples of this appears very early on in the first episode of the show. At the very end of the episode, Watashi goes to a famous bridge in Kyoto after being told that he will find Akashi there, the girl he has a crush on. He's not very resolute on confessing to her or anything, and is more so just there out of fear that Ozu might confess to her instead. When he finally runs into her on the bridge, his character turns all blocky, as if it's made out of cubes and hard edges. He stumbles over his words and acts very shy and unsure of himself, and eventually wobbles away from her without confessing anything at all. In my interpretation, this depiction of Watashi is a very clever and funny play on the phrase acting stiff. Describing someone's demeanor as stiff usually means that they're behaving in a very wooden and lifeless way, as if they're a doll or puppet. It's often used for when characters are acting poorly on stage, usually due to nerves or lack of experience. And so, in the Tatami Galaxy, when Watashi runs into his crush and gets super nervous, he literally becomes stiff. He's made of blocks and hard edges and wobbles around like a complete freak. This is a very straightforward example of symbolic imagery. Watashi isn't actually turning into a Minecraft character at this moment, but making him look like this adds to the impression that he's uncomfortable and doesn't really know how to act. Choosing to represent his apprehension and lack of confidence in this way adds an extra layer of dimension to his performance that may not have sold as well through just dialogue. In addition to augmenting certain character designs based on what the moment calls for, the Tatami Galaxy also takes things a step further, making fully symbolic shots and scenes that are interspersed throughout the show. Very often you'll come across shots that have very simple 2 or 3 color backgrounds and simplified silhouette characters that inhabit them. These shots are almost always metaphorical depictions of things as they are imagined in Watashi's mind. These scenes often depict outlandish or physically impossible imagery and are used by the show to supplement the verbal descriptions that Watashi often volunteers. These shots are very common throughout the show, so it's almost hard to choose a single one to call out, but the most notorious ones are probably the depictions of Johnny. Johnny is the visual representation of Watashi's lust, depicted as a cartoon cowboy riding a horse. The imagery is extremely silly and outlandish, but it does do a good job of representing Watashi's inner world. His purely imagined dialogue with his desires is rendered out for us in visual form, which lets us as the audience understand the struggle that is going on in Watashi's brain, with his rational side arguing against his impulses and wants. Once again, this choice does come with a risk. If people don't understand that this funny yellow cowboy is a visual representation of something else, there's a very high chance that they'll get confused. However, in the end, I think the merits of taking that risk outweighs the possible downsides, and I'm glad that Tatami Galaxy chooses to take a leap of faith in its visuals. The last thing I want to mention is sort of antithetical to the symbolic shots that I just talked about, and that is the inclusion of live-action footage into the show. If anyone knows of any other anime that does this, please let me know in the comments, but at the very least this is my first experience of watching an anime like this. The Tatami Galaxy actually uses live-action footage or frames a lot, sometimes for full motion shots and other times for set pieces and backgrounds that the animated characters live within. The live-action footage is always processed in a very interesting way. I'd almost relate it to the style of pop art, with very limited color palettes that put an emphasis on dark splotchy details contrasting with bright single colors. The introduction of live-action footage into the show is honestly pretty jarring at first. For people that are used to a very specific anime style, it can definitely come as a shock to see cut-ins of live-action trains or rivers in a show like this. But this choice quickly came to be one of my favorite things about the Tatami Galaxy. Despite being of two very disparate styles, the anime characters somehow come to feel at home in the world of live-action footage. Your brain learns to accept when the background first seen is a photograph rather than a hand-drawn image. Somehow these two worlds come to make sense to you as one and the same. The use of live-action footage in the Tatami Galaxy comes across to me as not only a stylistic choice, but also as a narrative one. As I mentioned throughout this video, the Tatami Galaxy seems to exist in two different worlds. The characters have simpler designs and more realistic features, however they can contort in ways that normal anatomy would not permit, and their forms are often broken in order to add figurative imagery to the story. In addition to that, some shots in the show are purely symbolic and exist only as a representation of actual events, but other shots are live-action videos, transcending even the medium of animation in their tangibility and reality. And that dual nature seems to speak to the core of what the Tatami Galaxy is trying to represent. Watashi, as the main character, is a person who exists as often in his idealized world as he does in the real one. He has grandiose expectations of his college life, doing so many things in pursuit of the rose-colored campus life that he dreams of. Yet despite his efforts, he never seems to be able to reach that goal. The idealized life that he envisions is somehow still disparate from the life he truly lives. Those simple colored figurative images that exist in the story are representations of Watashi's hopes and dreams for his college life. The simple and dramatized world that he hopes will become reality. And in contrast to that, the live-action footage used in the show depicts the apparent normalcy of his actual life, the blunt mundanity of it all. In the final episode of the Tatami Galaxy, Watashi is stuck in an endless series of rooms, all rendered in live action through either footage or photography. This is the timeline in which he didn't attempt to chase his ideal campus life. This is the world in which nothing exists but the endless, brutally realistic world he's chosen to confine himself in. The only time in which we see a return to the more cartoony shots are when Watashi is reflecting on the experiences he lived in other timelines. It's not until he breaks free of this world, learning to appreciate the journey as well as the destination, that the original style of the show starts to return. Watashi learns in the show that even though he felt like his rose-colored campus life escaped him, it was actually there the whole time, in the experiences he lived through and the people by his side. And this message is represented both through the story and through the unique visual style this show chooses to have. Thanks for watching. This script has honestly gone through the most revisions out of anything I've ever written. Without meaning to, I realized I tried to tackle a really complex task in this video, trying to rationalize and analyze the purpose of the visuals in the show, which is something I haven't seen done before for the Tatami Galaxy. I still don't really know if my interpretation is correct. I think it lines up with the message of the show and has a lot of thematic depth, but this is the type of question to which there's not really a true answer. So if anyone has alternate interpretations or theories, please leave them in the comments. I'd love to read them. Thank you so much for being here.